You feel a cold, hollow ache in your chest at 6 p.m. as you watch your grandson's eyes drift toward the red circle on your kitchen calendar. It's that same rhythmic throb you've ignored for months, telling yourself it's just the damp weather or the fog of aging. You've tried justifying his sudden visits. You've tried ignoring the missing ledger entries. And you've tried convincing yourself that blood could never be this cold. But that nagging doubt isn't a sign of your decline. It's your survival instinct warning you that your sanctuary has become a hunting ground. In the next few minutes, you will finally understand what is really happening inside your own home. My name is Eleanor Margaret Vance, and at 74, I have spent my life surrounded by the quiet hum of the county library, where I served as head librarian for decades. I was a woman of logic until 3 years ago, when my beloved husband, Arthur, was taken by Parkinson's. Since then, the physical silence of our home has become a sensory pain echoing through every room. I still wake up expecting to hear him whistling the melody of Autumn Leaves while he prepares my morning Earl Grey tea, a ritual that once acted as my protective shield. Now that silence is a heavy coat I cannot remove, leaving me vulnerable to the shadows creeping into my life. My world now revolves around a strict routine, tending to my prize-winning African violets at 9 a.m. and highlighting the local newspaper for my caregiver, Sarah Jenkins. I also keep a red ledger of every penny spent, an old habit of intellectual pride. My family is small: my grandson Leo, the only child of my late son Mark, and Brenda, Mark's widow, who is currently in recovery. I am telling this story from my garden in Connecticut. Where are you watching from? Comment your city below so I can thank you personally. Also, please note that while inspired by true patterns of financial elder abuse, names and events are fictional for your entertainment. Tuesday, April 14th, was a humid evening, making my African violets thirsty and my joints ache with a dull, rhythmic throb. Leo arrived unexpectedly, his presence a sudden burst of sunlight in the dim hallway. He helped me miss the delicate purple petals, his movements graceful and practiced, mirroring my late son Mark. However, as he reached for his phone, a small, crumpled slip of paper escaped his pocket, fluttering onto the Persian rug. It was a receipt from Quick Cash Loans dated that very afternoon for a staggering $3,000. He snatched it up with a nervous, jagged laugh, claiming it was just a discarded flyer. I smiled back, but my heart felt a cold, sharp prickle of unnameable doubt. That night, I stood alone in the kitchen, the refrigerator's hum a lonely companion to my racing thoughts. My gaze drifted to the green spiral-bound calendar hanging near the pantry. Because of the upcoming bank holiday, I had moved the big red C for my $4,000 pension deposit from the 15th to the 17th. Leo always claimed his visits were spontaneous, mere coincidences born of a grandson's longing. Yet he unexpectedly mentioned staying until Friday, shifting his usual routine to align perfectly with that rescheduled red circle. Why would a spontaneous visit move in tandem with a bank's internal processing schedule? A heavy, suffocating silence filled the room as I realized the math simply didn't add up anymore. I am a librarian. I treat my life like a collection of data, and that Wednesday night, I began a silent audit. I sat at the mahogany desk Arthur bought for our 20th anniversary, opening my red ledger with hands that trembled only slightly. I compared the past 6 months of Leo's visits against the specific dates of my $4,500 pension deposits. On October 2nd, the bank holiday moved the deposit to the 3rd, and Leo arrived at 4:15 p.m. on that exact Thursday. On December 20th, another shift occurred, and like a well-rehearsed actor, Leo appeared on my doorstep with a bouquet of carnations. The math was perfect, cold, and utterly devastating to my weary heart. The next morning, I watched him from the kitchen window while he tended to my African violets with a grace that felt increasingly performative. He was wearing another crisp white Ralph Lauren shirt and smelled of that expensive sandalwood cologne I once admired. He looked so much like my son Mark that it physically ached to breathe. Yet his movements were too calculated, his smiles too quick to reach his eyes. When he came inside, he asked for my intellectual advice on a new venture in digital assets, playing perfectly into my pride of being a knowledgeable woman. I realized then that his charm was just a poorly edited script he used to distract me from his true intentions. Under the guise of a routine cleanup, I retreated to my bedroom to check the small, fireproof safe I kept hidden behind the poetry section of my bookshelf. This was my emergency medical fund, a secret $50,000 reserve Arthur and I saved to build a children's reading room in our town. My breath hitched when I pulled out the latest statement from May 8th and saw a series of unauthorized withdrawals totaling exactly $15,000. Each transaction was small, appearing as miscellaneous fees or utility adjustments that I had missed during my moments of grief. The first concrete anomaly was staring back at me in black and white, a betrayal written in ink that no eraser could ever remove. I knew I couldn't solve this puzzle alone, so I waited until Leo went to the hardware store before I approached Sarah Jenkins in the laundry room. Sarah is a 40-year-old nurse who has been my constant shadow for 2 years, a woman whose eyes hold the weight of seeing too much human suffering. She didn't look surprised when I showed her the bank statement. She simply set down the basket of towels and closed the door with a quiet, resolute click. I saw a flash of pity in her gaze, which wounded me more than the theft itself, as she prepared to tell me the truth she had been observing from the sidelines for months. Sarah pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket, revealing a meticulous log of every time Leo had entered the house while I was napping. She explained that he wasn't just visiting. He was systematically searching my desk and scanning documents while I dreamt of Arthur. She pointed out that on the months where I moved the red C on the kitchen calendar due to banking delays, Leo's spontaneous trips shifted in perfect synchronization with the money. My caregiver had been documenting a pattern of calculated predation while I was blinded by the simple, desperate need for a grandson's touch. The realization that my sanctuary had been a hunting ground made the room feel suddenly, violently cold. To confirm our fears with professional precision, I reached out to Detective Miller, a former regular at the county library who spent 15 years investigating financial crimes. Miller was a man who understood that truth is often found in the margins of life, and he arrived at my back door after dusk, disguised as a garden contractor. He brought a sense of clinical authority that silenced my remaining hopes of a misunderstanding, his face grim as he laid out his tools on the kitchen island. He explained that elder abuse often starts with these grooming phases, where the perpetrator isolates the victim with affection before moving in for the final, total liquidation of their assets and legacy. Miller took my smartphone and ran a diagnostic check that revealed a sophisticated family tracking sync app installed deep within the operating system. It had been placed there on March 12th, a day Leo spent 3 hours fixing my slow internet connection while I baked him a batch of oatmeal cookies. This spyware gave him real-time access to my bank notifications, my private emails, and even my location, explaining how he always knew exactly when the pension hit my account. Seeing that digital tether on the screen made me feel violated, as if a stranger had been standing in my bedroom watching me sleep for months without my knowledge or consent. The investigation deepened when Miller accessed a restricted database and discovered that Leo was drowning in nearly $80,000 of debt from illegal crypto betting and failed speculative scams. He showed me records from Quick Cash loans, where Leo had listed my home as collateral, forging my signature with a shaky hand that he must have practiced for hours. My grandson wasn't just a thief. He was a desperate gambler who had already gambled away my roof and my husband's memory to satisfy his own narcissistic greed. The layers of this conspiracy were expanding, revealing a darkness in my own bloodline that I had spent 3 years trying to ignore in favor of a comforting lie that had reached its bitter expiration date. The final discovery of the afternoon was the most chilling. Leo hadn't been acting alone, as Miller found encrypted messages linking him back to Brenda, my son's widow. Brenda had been claiming to be in a high-cost recovery program paid for by my money, but she was actually living in a luxury condo downtown. They were working together, a mother and son team of vultures waiting for my health to fail so they could claim my estate. My heart hardened into a cold, sharp diamond of resolve as I realized the scale of the trap they had set for me. Have you ever had a gut feeling about a family member that turned out to be true? Comment yes below. Detective Miller's hands moved across the digital documents with a clinical coldness that made the air in my kitchen feel thin. I sat there, clutching Arthur's old library card, the only thing that felt real in the suffocating silence of this house. The screen revealed a web of communication I never anticipated. It wasn't just Leo. Brenda was the architect of this misery. My daughter-in-law, whom I had supported through recovery with $2,000 monthly checks, was actually living in a $400,000 condo on Harbor Street. They had exchanged 400 encrypted messages discussing my decline and how to expedite the transfer of assets. My own family was a syndicate of vultures waiting for my final breath. The investigation took a darker turn when Miller pulled up a scanned PDF dated February 12th. It was a subject-to-death contract signed with a local developer named Victor Thorne. Leo had essentially sold my late husband's dream, our home, for a discounted price of $350,000, payable upon my departure from the property. The cold, legal language stripped away my humanity, turning my life into a timed financial obstacle for a developer's parking lot. I looked at the signature. It was a perfect forgery of my own, practiced and precise. My legacy, my memories of Arthur, and the very roof over my head had been auctioned off while I was baking oatmeal cookies. For weeks, I had been experiencing bouts of dizziness and sudden, unexplainable mental fog that I attributed to my age. Now, looking at the medicine cabinet through Miller's professional lens, the truth was much more sinister. We found a small, unlabeled vial of lorazepam hidden behind the extra Earl Grey tea bags. Leo had been seasoning my evening tea, the ritual Arthur once performed with love, to manufacture symptoms of early-onset dementia. Every time I felt confused and reached for his hand, he was the one who had poisoned my mind to ensure my testimony would be dismissed in court. The physical violation was a jagged knife twisting in my chest. The personal risk escalated when I found a glossy brochure for oak shadows tucked into the pocket of Leo's leather laptop bag. Oak Shadows is a notorious state-run facility 3 counties away, known for its low-cost care and high mortality rates. Attached to the brochure was a pre-filled application dated May 10th, listing me as a high-risk patient with severe cognitive impairment. My grandson had already picked out the room where I would be left to wither away in silence, far from my African violets in Arthur's books. He wasn't just waiting for me to die. He was actively clearing the path to ensure I was removed from society before I could fight. Miller pointed out another chilling detail. The miscellaneous fees on my statements weren't just random thefts. They were payments made to a clerk at the local branch of First National Bank, a man named George Davis. Leo had bribed a bank official to suppress the automatic fraud alerts that should have triggered when my $50,000 emergency medical fund started leaking like a sieve. This wasn't a reckless kid making mistakes. It was a sophisticated, multi-layered criminal operation involving professionals I had trusted for decades. I realized then that my isolation was complete. The town I had served as a librarian was being turned against me by my own grandson's calculated, greedy hands. Leo returned from the store at 6:45 p.m., his smile as bright and hollow as a polished marble. I had to sit across from him at the dinner table, watching him eat the roast chicken Sarah had prepared, while knowing he was planning my incarceration. He looked so much like Mark in that moment, the same jawline, the same way he tilted his head when he laughed. I felt a violent collision of love and loathing in my gut, a physical sickness that made it hard to swallow. I wanted to scream, to reach across the table and demand to know where my sweet boy went. but I had to remain the confused grandmother he expected. As he spoke about his investments, my mind raced back to April 2nd, the day he brought me those yellow carnations. I remembered feeling so touched, thinking he had noticed they were Arthur's favorite. Now I realized he bought them with my own credit card to distract me while he scanned the house deed in the study. Every "I love you, Grandma" was a tactical move. Every hug a way to check if I was wearing my medical alert necklace. The retroactive guilt was a suffocating weight. I had been his unwitting accomplice in my own destruction. I had fed the wolf that was now preparing to tear my life apart for 30 pieces of silver. The danger was no longer just financial. It was existential. Miller warned me that as the subject-to-death contract deadline approached on June 1st, Leo's desperation would peak. With $80,000 in debt to people who didn't take "I'll pay you later" for an answer, my grandson was a cornered animal. If the dementia plan didn't work quickly enough, he might resort to something more permanent than lorazepam in my tea. My home, once a place of memories and Earl Grey, had become a ticking time bomb. Every floorboard creak sounded like a threat, and every shadow in the hallway seemed to carry the weight of a grandson who viewed my heartbeats as a liability. Tonight, Leo insisted on making the tea himself, his hand steady as he reached for the kettle. I watched from the doorway, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I saw him fumble with a small white packet, his back turned to me, before stirring something into my favorite blue ceramic mug. He walked toward me, that golden boy smile fixed on his face, and handed me the steaming cup. "Drink up, Grandma. It'll help you sleep," he whispered with a chilling tenderness. This is the moment where everything changes, and what I'm about to show you is truly disturbing. If you are sensitive to betrayal, you should leave now. Should I drink it? I stared into the blue ceramic mug, the steam carrying the faint chemical scent of lorazepam that Sarah had taught me to identify. My hand didn't shake. It grew unnaturally still as I realized the depth of the betrayal wasn't just in cup, but in the memory of the man who died years ago. I set the tea down on the mahogany table and reached for Leo's phone, which he had left charging in the kitchen. My eyes blurred as I read an encrypted message from an unsaved number that stopped my heart. It wasn't from Brenda. It was a voice from the grave. The message read, "Is she gone yet? I can't stay hidden in this condo forever, Leo." A violent, icy shiver raced down my spine, settling in the marrow of my bones as the realization hit me like a physical blow to the chest. The Mark's eyes I saw in Leo weren't just a genetic echo. They were a living, breathing nightmare. My son, Mark, hadn't died in that car accident 5 years ago. His death was a $2 million insurance fraud scheme orchestrated by Brenda and Leo to settle their mounting gambling debts. I looked at the funeral photos on the mantel, and for the first time, I saw the poorly edited shadows and the inconsistencies I had ignored in my grief. The man I had mourned was alive, hiding in the condo I was funding. Suddenly, every moment of the last 5 years shifted into a grotesque new shape, making my stomach churn with a bitter, acidic regret. I remembered the closed casket funeral and how Brenda had insisted on a quick cremation, claiming it was Mark's final wish. I recalled the anonymous donations to the library that I thought were tributes to his memory, but were actually recycled money from the insurance payout. I had been a librarian of lies, cataloging a tragedy that never happened while my own son watched me wither from a distance. The love I felt for Leo wasn't a bridge to the past. It was a tether to a conspiracy that began the moment the accident was staged. The grief that had defined my life for years vanished, replaced by a cold, surgical clarity that transformed me from a victim into a predator. I realized that my son Mark wasn't a victim of fate, but the architect of my destruction, using his own child as a weapon against his mother. I stood up, poured the poisoned tea into the sink, and looked at the kitchen clock. It was exactly 7:15 p.m. Before I walk into that living room to face the ghost of my son, and the greed of my grandson. I need to know who is still here with me. Type "I am here" in the comments right now if you are ready for the final confrontation. I walked into the living room at 7:20 p.m., my steps certain on the polished oak floors Arthur once waxed every Saturday. Leo was sitting in Arthur's wingback chair, nursing a beer and looking like the grandson I wanted to keep forever. But the shadows in the corner moved. Detective Miller and Sarah Jenkins stepped into the light, their faces as grim as a closing chapter. Leo's smile didn't just fade, it curdled like old milk when he saw the digital recorder in Miller's hand and the official warrant on the coffee table. The air became a pressurized chamber of truth, and for the first time in 3 years, I wasn't the one who felt afraid of the silence. I laid the red ledger and the subject-to-death contract on the table with a clinical precision that would have made my old library board proud. I pointed to the $15,000 siphoned from the reading room fund and the $350,000 price tag he had placed on my very existence. "I am not confused, Leo, and I am certainly not your collateral," I said, my voice a steady, low hum of justice. Sarah held up the vial of lorazepam we found in the Earl Grey box, its white label a silent witness to his chemical cruelty. We had the messages, the bank logs from George Davis, and the GPS data from the tracking app he used to hunt my pension checks. Leo lunged toward me, his face twisting into a mask of faux concern that felt like a physical violation of Mark's memory. "Grandma, you're having another episode. You're seeing things that aren't there because of the grief," he shouted, his voice cracking with a desperate, practiced tremor. He tried to grab my hands, reaching for the golden boy persona he had used to groom me for months, begging me to remember the carnations and the stories about Arthur. He invoked my dead son's name, using Mark's ghost as a human shield against the mountain of evidence, but I didn't flinch. I just looked at him with the cold, detached eyes of a woman who had finished reading a very bad book. The mask finally shattered when Miller played the recording of Leo discussing my departure with the developer, Victor Thorne. Leo's eyes turned a dark, oily black as he realized the $80,000 debt was no longer a secret. "You're a fossil, Eleanor, sitting on a fortune that belongs to the living while I drown in the real world," he screamed, the confession pouring out of him like toxic waste. He admitted to the insurance fraud, bragging about how Mark was laughing at me from that luxury condo while I spent my nights crying over an empty grave. He confessed to everything, the forgeries, the bribes, and the poisoning, thinking his honesty was a weapon, but it was just his own judicial noose. Detective Miller didn't wait for him to catch his breath. He moved with the surgical efficiency of a man who had seen this darkness 1,000 times. The metallic click of the handcuffs echoed through the hallway, a sharp, final sound that signaled the end of the Vance family legacy, as I knew it. Miller read the Miranda rights with a monotonous gravity that made the room feel like a courtroom, his voice echoing against the portraits of the ancestors Leo had betrayed. Neighbors gathered on the porch, their faces pressed against the glass as the golden boy was led out in shame. The public exposure was the first real step towards sanitizing the house of his presence and his lies. The legal fallout was swift and devastating, a series of judicial strikes that dismantled their conspiracy in less than 6 months. Leo was sentenced to 15 years for elder abuse and grand larceny, while Brenda received 10 years for her role in the $2 million insurance fraud. The subject-to-death contract was declared void by Judge Harrison on August 12th, and the $15,000 was returned to the Reading Room Fund, with interest seized from Leo's remaining assets. George Davis lost his banking license and faces 5 years for his part in the bribery. As I watched the police cruisers disappear, I saw a single yellow carnation petal on the floor, the last remnant of a beautiful, deadly lie. It has been exactly 8 months since the sirens faded, and today, the Vance Children's Reading Room finally opened its doors to the public. I stood among the shelves of classic literature, smelling the familiar scent of old paper and fresh wax, a sensory victory that Arthur would have cherished. The silence in my Connecticut home no longer feels like a heavy coat of mourning. It is now a peaceful sanctuary of my own making. I recently visited the memorial garden I created for the son I lost twice, finally letting go of the ghost that Leo used as a weapon. The African violets are blooming with a vibrant, defiant purple, mirroring my own internal restoration and quiet strength. They say blood is thicker than water, but I have learned that greed is often thicker than blood. You must protect the elders in your life, for the most dangerous wolf is often the one who knows your name. God sees the secrets hidden in the heart, but the bank sees the cold reality of every transaction. Do not let your kindness become your ultimate weakness in a world of scheduled greed. If this story of justice touched you, please comment, share, and subscribe to join our community of truth. This narrative was inspired by real patterns of financial elder abuse, but all names and events are fictional for your entertainment. Thank you for standing with me.